my name is Sahkiya Olatunji, and today I'm going to be talking about gender inequality. Defining gender. Gender refers to the social and cultural patterns attached to men and women. Gender roles are defined as the role or behavior learned by a person as appropriate to their gender, determined by the prevailing cultural norms. Defining gender inequality. Gender inequality is the social process by which people are treated differently and disadvantageously under similar circumstances on the basis of gender. And there is no nation where men and women are completely equal globally. Now, another component of gender inequality is gender stratification, which refers to the latter arrangement of the sexes that gives women unequal power, opportunities, and resources. Race, class, and sexuality work together to produce differences among both men and women. So, for example, a straight white male who is of a higher socioeconomic class is going to face less obstacles, therefore probably having a better experience versus a black woman who identified as lesbian and was of a lower socioeconomic class. Now, there are a couple challenges of gender inequality, the first of which being sexual objectification of women. This is a huge issue due to the fact that women have to continually battle against that in addition to other forms of discrimination, often at the same times. The next is representation of women in history is severely lacking. The response of most non-feminist historians has been acknowledgement and then separation or dismissal. And by that I mean historians will tend to give women's history a smaller section instead of overall integrating into just common everyday history that is then taught in public schools and private schools nationwide. Or they just won't incorporate it at all. Next, it's very common for women to be blamed for the obstacles that negatively afflict them. This pertains to discrimination, sexual assault, and so much more. The solutions are then centered around how women can alter themselves to prevent these things versus the system being fixed to better suit the victims. There have been a couple American movements, and women of color have been at the forefront of every movement geared towards progress and equality in the United States. Now, around World War I and World War II, industrialization became very prominent, and because most of the men were off at war, women were encouraged to go and pursue male-dominated fields such as medicine and factory work. Another movement is women's suffrage, and that was geared to let women vote. And although women of color did protest and fight for that right as well, only white women were awarded that. And later on during the Civil Rights Movement, which began to achieve equal citizenship rights and fair treatment of Black Americans, that then granted all women and all men the right to vote regardless of color and race, and it also granted them citizenship if they were a natural born citizen or just living in the U.S. at that time. Feminist movement is an ongoing movement to get women equality, and that is somewhat encompassed in all of the movements I've been talking about recently. Now, gendering is begun even before the child is born. A common example of that is just color coordination. Pink equals a girl, and boy often indicates, or blue often indicates a boy. Once the child is born, the biggest teachers of gender are family and peers. The peers more so come in when the child begins to go to school. For example, boys are typically encouraged to play outside and give sports a try, while girls are encouraged to stay in and play and maybe help their mother with a couple household tasks. Now, there's a huge issue with inequality in education. It is significantly easier for men to get a quality education. In addition, it has been statistically proven that boys are given preferred treatment while they're in school. Now, in many countries, women are still given a lesser or no education at all. Some examples of that would be South Sudan, Nigeria, and parts of Pakistan, and that is where Malala was from, and that was a very prominent story throughout the world, and it was quite inspirational. She fought for education equality in her hometown in Pakistan. Another thing is that the U.S. history the U.S. has a history of depriving women of proper education as well. And in 1972, the Education Amendment Act called for gender equality in education, which then combated the lack thereof beforehand. Next, we're going to be talking about inequality in the workplace. One of the most controversial and popular issues right now is the pay gap or the wage gap, also talked about as unequal pay. This graph right here is just illustrating the fact that women, which is the dark purple, cap off about at like 78%, while men are closer to the top in this lavender, and it's a significant amount more of money that they are able to make. And women make less money across the board, like I just said, than men in any given field. Studies point to the household division of labor and socialized internal constraints, as well as employers' prejudice, which devalues women and activities associated with them. Worldwide, women perform an estimated 60% of the work, yet they only earn 10% of the income and own 10% of the land. In the U.S., despite the 1963 Equal Pay Act, women are still paid less than men, yet a significant degree of wage inequality and sex segregation in occupations and jobs has still persisted in the face of these profound changes. The size of the gender pay gap varies depending on who you ask. Women, on average, earn 79 cents for every dollar men make, and that was in 2015. Depending on race and socioeconomic status, that can range quite a bit. For example, Black and Latino women typically make less than the average white woman in America. And another issue of inequality in the workplace is hiring discrimination, which was combated with affirmative action in 1961, although discrimination in the workplace is still present today. There has also been a long history of inequality in law, and that's been a worldwide phenomenon that's still going on to this day. Now, within the states, women were recently granted the right to vote with the 19th Amendment, and that was again for white women. And in 1963, the Equal Pay Act, like I said before, was put into place to combat the wage gap. As well as in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed to allow Black women and men equality, citizenship, and the right to vote. And in 1978, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act was passed to combat hiring discrimination against pregnant women, and that was also geared to stop women who got pregnant to be fired from their job. Now, what can society do to help aid the progress of this movement? As an individual, one can practice treating all genders as if they're equal. In addition, pay attention to political candidates and actively vote for people who believe in gender equality and have plans to help the movement. As a society, victim blaming needs to end. It's time to take a system blame approach and enact change. The women's rights movement is getting loads of traction right now, and it's time to take advantage of that spotlight and continue the fight. Thank you.